Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares with the top economic and financial reports. Coming up, Agrotech experts gather in Israel for Agritech. And this year's Mayday serves as a distress call for workers globally. First, the headlines. China's manufacturing sector in April posted its weakest performance in the year, reinforcing views Beijing would soon roll out more stimulus measures. The HSBC Purchasing Managers Index fell to a final reading of 48.9 in April, further below the 50 level that separates expansion from contraction. The reading contrasted with the official PMI released on Friday, which came in at 50.1, rising at the same rate as in March. The readings are sharply different as the private HSBC survey focuses on smaller export-led companies, whereas the official measure has a greater proportion of big state companies. Asian stocks bounced off lows on Monday as investors widely expect more stimulus from Beijing following weak China factory activity. Shares in Shanghai fell after the PMI survey but quickly erased losses and were up 0.5% as investors bet on more policy easing. The bounce in China's markets pulled the MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan up 0.2%. But the rally was tempered by a number of events this week, including the UK election on Thursday, US non-farm payrolls on Friday, and China trade data also on Friday. Oil was mostly flat on Monday, holding on to gains made since January as weak Chinese manufacturing data signaled a slowing in fuel demand there. Brent June crude futures rose but stayed below $66.93 a barrel, a 2015 peak hit on April 30th. U.S. June crude also remained below its 2015 peak of $59.90 a barrel hit on May 1st. Brent crude has recovered by more than 40% from a more than 6-year low of $45.19 a barrel in January. But an expected slowdown in Chinese fuel demand, the world's second largest energy consumer, could weigh on a further rise in the price of oil. Trading in Greek government bonds was at its lowest level in April since the run-up to its 2012 default, as investors stayed away. Only 2 million euros of Greek government bonds were traded in April, compared to 866 million euros last year, when Greece returned to public bond markets. Greek bond prices began to fall as popular support lifted the anti-austerity Syriza party into power. Athens says it will meet debt repayments and reach a deal to unlock remaining bailout aid. It needs to repay the IMF this month. But time is slowly running out, and if Greece does not reach an agreement with its European creditors by July, another default and eventual Grexit might be inevitable. Agritech, an international exhibition of Agrotech that takes place once every 3 years in Israel, is a central point of focus for the world's agricultural leaders. I-24 News journalist Shelby Weiner gives us a short look into what attracts people from far and wide to this multinational event.
Tel Aviv hosted the annual agriculture conference Agritech for its 19th year. The exhibition brings together local governments, engineers, project developers, and entrepreneurs from all over the world, interested in agriculture's latest technology. And international networking plays a big part in the conference.
We took the opportunity of this show because it's an international show. We want to meet people from other countries. And we met people from India, from South America, from Europe. So we start relations with them, and we want to expand.
The conference's location is also an important part of the event. Tel Aviv is known for its startup and technology-based companies. Israeli agriculture is also known for its innovation coming from a country with little resources.
When outside world looks at Israel, two things comes to mind. One is that the rainfall is 400 mm, but if you come and see, the country looks quite green. And also producing agricultural produces which are probably unique. That draws attention to know how this can be made possible.
That attention makes Agritech Israel a desirable place for foreigners to look for agricultural answers. The conference traditionally attracts a third of its visitors from international countries, with hundreds of exhibitors ready to find solutions to the agricultural needs.
And most of the questions that the Nigerians are asking, they need added value to our products, to our vegetables. We produce en masse, but they go in waste because there are no, good preservative methods.
The three-day conference showcased Israeli technology and the international agriculture community and led to many new business meetings and partnerships.
Britain is gearing up for what polls suggest will be the closest election since the 1970s, with the two main parties neck on neck. Joining us now for more on the UK election, as well as other events this week, is our financial and currency expert from JKonFX, Joel Kruger. Mr. Kruger.
Hi, Binyamin. Good to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So, the UK election, obviously a very big event this week. What do you see here?
Well, right now it's going to be an interesting development because there's no clear winner, and what we're likely is we're going to get some gridlock over the coming weeks. We're not going to get a majority government, most likely, and what we're going to see is a lot of posturing back and forth to figure out and put a government together.
Who gets to build a coalition, essentially, who's going to be in the coalition.
Right. So right now it's looking like the Conservatives have a bit of an edge with a coalition with the Lib Dems.
Which would perhaps, also include the UKIP?
Well, it's possible. One of the interesting things that's going on right now is we're not seeing a lot of positioning and sort of party talking between the parties. It's more campaigning within each party right now. But it will be interesting. And then you have Labour and the SNP on the other side. Those are basically the two sides, neither of which has a real majority chance. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I think from a risk standpoint, Conservatives staying in power is less shaky to financial markets. And if Labour comes into power, then you get more disturbance in the financial markets.
Okay. Now, what else do we have going on here the rest of the week?
So the rest of the week is kind of light. There are two key events to watch for on the global calendar. Tomorrow we get the RBA rate decision. So the Australian Central Bank is going to move on rates. They're going to move to 2%. They're going to cut rates another 25 basis points. This was leaked in the papers last week. So they're going to slash rates to record lows. And then on Friday, the more significant event is the monthly employment report out of the U.S.
Right, of course. And of course, you also have trade data from China coming out on Friday, which is perhaps to a lesser extent maybe an indication of where China is going. And where that might affect the world.
Yeah.
Okay. And in terms of other, the last federal decision. How do you see that further affecting the markets?
So that was a bit of a shock to the markets. The market was positioned for a more dovish central bank that was going to sort of maybe pull back and not signal rate hikes. We don't know officially what's going to happen, but they kept to their mandate, suggesting that there is a door open still for maybe even a June, although slim, and September rate hike. So that was a bit of a shock to the markets.
And is there any political risk otherwise this week?
Well, there's Greece, and that's an ongoing saga.
They have until July, technically, no?
They have time. The biggest development with Greece over the past week is the pushing back of Varoufakis from his role within the negotiation team, and that people believe is going to be a positive development. Get him out of the limelight. He's been sort of hogging a little bit of the limelight, and it'll be a little bit more productive. He's offended a lot of the creditors. And
his middle finger,
well, that was way back, but so he has turned off the progress, and so I think the Greeks recognize this, and they've shaken up the negotiation team.
Okay, now closer to home in terms of the shekel. What do you see happening with the shekel market?
So I continue, even though we've seen a little bit of shekel strength over the past couple of days, I continue to see the shekel weakening. So if we look at the three major rates, we look at dollar shekel, I see supported at 380 going to 420, sterling shekel supported at 580 going to 620, and then euro shekel at 420 being supported going to about 450, I see over the medium term.
Fantastic. What are you currently trading?
So right now, in my portfolio, I have a long Aussie Kiwi position open, which we talked about several weeks back, which has started to move forward, move higher, which is great. I'm holding a short S&P futures position, and I'm looking to sell the euro soon.
Fantastic. Well, Joel Kruger, thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Good to be here.
Thank you. May 1st, a day that is synonymous with International Workers' Day, has long been a day celebrating the achievements of workers around the world. But in the wake of the Great Recession, suffocating austerity, and high unemployment, Daniel Roth reports on how workers observed this year's May Day.
Everything started in Chicago on May 1st, 1886. Some 400,000 workers took to the streets to demand a reduction in their working hours to 8 hours per day, leading to a general strike that paralyzed much in the city that was an industrial powerhouse of the time. 4 days and a dozen deaths later, the protesters were successful and International Workers' Day was born. Since then, every May 1st, workers from around the world gather to celebrate this event, and 2015 is no exception.
COSATU is joining millions and millions of workers across the globe in order to celebrate the 129th anniversary of the International Workers' Day.
For some countries, the 1st of May is synonymous with celebration. This is the case in Bolivia and Venezuela. This year, the leaders of these two countries took time during the celebrations to announce a minimum wage increase, 15% from La Paz and 30% from Caracas.
That's why I'm announcing today a 30% increase in the minimum salary for workers.
But in some places, the day's focus is less celebratory. In many countries in East Asia, for example, they face low salaries and rights violations by local and international employers.
We believe that we need universal suffrage through democracy to break the collusion between the business and the government. And then the workers' right can come in.
In Greece, several members of the leftist ruling party participated in the demonstrations, including the finance minister and minister of labor.
Today, together with the workers, the government gives a decisive fight for the return of the minimum wage and the collective wage agreement, so we can give a voice to the workers again. This struggle is the best way to honor Labor Day and the struggles of workers.
As well, this year's celebrations and conversations of workers' rights saw violence erupt on the streets of Seattle in the United States and Seoul, South Korea. In France, 3 feminine activists disrupted the traditional speech from the ultra-right-wing president of the National Front, Marine Le Pen. It's clear that in 2015, the world over, May 1st is still a modern holiday full of meaning.
The recent clashes between Israeli protesters of Ethiopian descent and police have drawn a lot of attention worldwide. With us in the studio is Daniel Roth to look at what exactly is behind, what is the economic angle to this story in Media Watch. Daniel, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
A sad story today.
Yeah, it's echoed around the world, as you said.
Yes.
I think most of the headlines are talking about sort of Baltimore has reached Israel, Baltimore has reached Tel Aviv, Baltimore has reached Jerusalem. Now, I spoke to a number of protesters yesterday on the street in Tel Aviv who said that wasn't their message. They're not to be grouped in with what's going on in the U.S.
It's an extremely different story, obviously. I mean, like, we're talking about skin color, but I mean, in terms of the actual history of the people, it's a completely different story.
Right. The history of oppression exists in both communities in their context in Israel and America, but they're very, very different. Economic depression and oppression exist in both communities in Israel and America, but they're very, very different. And so it's an important point that I think most of the global media hasn't actually digested. But you know, when we're looking at the economy here, there are a lot of echoes. You know, in Baltimore, you see in the predominantly poor neighborhoods that it's much higher rates of unemployment, much higher rates of poverty. Here, poverty levels in the Ethiopian communities in Israel are 3 times higher than other Jewish communities in Israel. Unemployment is 2 times higher than other Jewish communities in the rest of Israel. So it is a community that you can take and say, look, these numbers are much higher.
Clearly.
They are clearly underprivileged. 65% of Ethiopian youth are living below the poverty line. These are numbers that say the story is different. You know, actually, most of, just over half of the Ethiopian Israeli community was not born in Israel, was actually born in Africa. And
they essentially started coming here in the 1980s.
Yeah, there were small communities since the 1930s in the modern era. In the 1980s and famously in 1990.
The immigration actually started.
Yeah, the 14,000 people in that operation that brought them en masse, and that's actually when the big failure in absorbing those communities took place.
I mean, clearly, one of the biggest issues here is the state's inability or lack of ability to properly integrate these people into the Israeli fold, into Israeli society. I mean, do you have any numbers in that respect as well?
Yeah, well, so it's actually staggering, the hundreds of millions of dollars by the state and by the U.S. Jewish community. $600 million came from the U.S., directly for Ethiopian Jewish communities coming to Israel, and it was so deeply mismanaged, misplaced. They were put into temporary housing, and
which many still live in, for that matter.
Which many temporary housing, we say. Many found that they could only afford to buy houses in already depressed neighborhoods. So creating a cycle,
which in our current real estate environment is even worse.
Right, and this kind of cycle of sort of ghettoization we've seen happen across Israel, across immigration waves.
Right. Well, Daniel, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
That is the end of our Economy Magazine, your daily source for economic and financial reports at I-24 News. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares. Thanks for joining us, and join us again tomorrow.